Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. It's been a long time since I've done one of these, but this is a Ukraine War update extra video giving you the nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. And we're going to do, I've been meaning to do, particularly this one. This came out now, 6 days ago. Been meaning to do it every day since then. And then another Pekka Kallioniemi thread talking about disinformation. So let's just go through a couple of threads and hopefully they will be of use to you. So in today's Vatnik Soup, says Kallioniemi, I'm going to talk about Europe's information defence against foreign influence operations and disinformation. The EU can't rely anymore on America's help in geopolitical struggles, and it's time we created a united front against information threats. So recent news coming from the US should be the final wake-up call for European decision makers. Recently, Trump's rhetoric has been openly pro-Kremlin and both anti-Ukraine and anti-EU, and at the same time, the US is dismantling all institutions fighting against disinformation. So, just to give you the sense that this was written before, like 6 days ago, so before the Riyadh peace negotiations, where it appears that the US has capitulated to Russia much more obviously. This is concerning the getting rid of the department that looks at foreign interference in US elections, getting rid of the department that seizes Russian oligarchs' frozen assets, etc., etc. Like they are. You've got the CIA and the FBI being slashed to some degree. You've got counterterrorism and counter intelligence being slashed as well. So none of this is looking good for the US's ability to keep ahead of disinformation coming from Russia. So far, the Trump administration has put staffers working on disinformation as well as a team of election security advisors at the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, on administrative leave. In addition, the FBI task force to combat foreign influence campaigns in US politics by Russia, China and other countries was dismantled. The Trump administration also disbanded a task force focusing on enforcing sanctions and targeting oligarchs close to the Kremlin. To make things worse, Trump's cabinet nominations, especially Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, should sound alarm bells and questions whether the EU should be sharing intelligence with the US any longer. We need to protect our own information space. Today, the EU's main adversary in the information war is, of course, Russia. The Kremlin has been waging this war against the West at least since 2013, and since then the EU is outsmarted and out-resourced by it, has been outsmarted and out-resourced by the Russians. In other words, they've won and we've lost. Russia's scope alone in these operations is staggering, and by the way, for each of these claims, he gives you an image or some kind of extra information. I'm not going into it, but it's worth looking at. Actually, I will go through this one because this is very reminiscent of Steve Bannon's muzzle velocity. A firehose of falsehood, the Russian style of propaganda for an age of information abundance. And I've actually shared this exact image with you before. High volume and multi-channel approach. Shameless in its willingness to broadcast lies. No commitment to or requirement for consistency. Rapid, continuous and repetitive messaging. Point is not to persuade, but to confuse and overwhelm. Assumes a low trust environment and lowers it further. Number of arguments matters more than their quality, and drown out competing messages through sheer volume. That's how the Russians go about doing it. So he continues, Russia's scope alone on these operations is staggering. According to Zhenzhen Vilma et al. 2018, Russia was responsible for 80% of information aggression in Europe. At the same time, it's a war of asymmetry. They lie, and we desperately try to debunk their BS. The Kremlin spends around 2 billion euros annually on national mass media, and it is estimated that they spend much more on malign influence operations and disinformation abroad. Russia is a disinformation superpower and one of the few nations that truly understands its power. And the EU, it's very difficult to estimate how much is spent on fighting disinformation in the EU, since each country has their own efforts to counter it. In addition to these spendings, the EU spends roughly 25 million euros annually on EU-wide projects. So that's a drop in the ocean compared to the Russians. Just going by these numbers, it's very easy to see that we are being overwhelmed by Russia, and our efforts against their massive campaigns seem almost futile. The EU simply doesn't have the volume or the resources to fight against all of this. Fighting online disinformation is extremely challenging, as even When one discovers these networks and exposes them, they usually just continue business as usual, adapt and change strategies, and often even grow to become much bigger than before. For example, the famous Russian Operation Doppelganger has resurfaced and is currently creating massive disinformation campaigns around the German elections. So-called social media super spreaders, including Tim Pool, Benny Johnson and Dave Rubin from the Tenet media case, have grown their social media presence on all platforms massively, despite having been exposed to be paid by the Kremlin. In the current information space, being exposed as a liar and cheat is actually good for you and just gives you even more exposure. And that's not all. In the strangest turn of events, we are now also fighting against American BS over the ownership of Greenland and annexation of Canada. In addition, the MAGA network has been spreading Moscow's narratives for years now. So what can be done? In the short term, the EU can focus on a few things: putting resources in debunking, exposing campaigns before they take place, exposing influence networks or censorship. Many EU countries don't have the cognitive resilience to fight these threats. And even the opportunity of temporarily closing down social media sites during elections should be discussed. This should be the last resort, and the EU would get harshly criticised for this. But for example, the US was ready to shut down TikTok due to security concerns. The power of social media over elections and politics shouldn't be underestimated. Even America's VP, Vice President JD Vance, suggested that the US support for NATO could be withdrawn if the EU tries to regulate Elon's X. The US wants to maintain its influence over the EU. Pre-bunking, which Vacnic Soup essentially is, has been shown to be an effective way of fighting online BS, but the problem with this is the limited scope. These reports reach only a small portion of the population, as they're mostly shared by outlets with no reach. Hello. Exposing influence networks and potentially disabling them is another effective way to fight disinformation, but for this, you need effective tools that are preferably from the EU. Unfortunately, the best AI-powered analysis tools like Blackbird AI come from the US. The EU should also fund the civil society and initiatives that focus on local influence campaigns. These were mostly funded by the now dysfunctional USAID, and the EU should step up to restart these extremely important programs in Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, etc. There should also be support for integrating the topics of media literacy and critical thinking into school curriculums. The strategy has been extremely effective in Finland, where Russian disinformation and propaganda has barely any effect on the local population. As Macron recently stated at the AI summit in Paris, Europe needs more research and investment in AI. Compared to AI giants like the US and China, the EU is far behind in the AI arms race, and there should be incentives for companies to stay and operate in the EU. But the bottom line is the European Union needs to spend much more money on fighting the information war. Right now, Russia might be preparing an invasion against the EU and NATO, and information war always precedes conventional war. We can't rely on the US anymore. A lot of this also applies to our close allies in the UK and Canada. Oh, and start building up those nukes. So there you go. That's his thread on disinformation and what the EU needs to do or can do about it. And we'll go on now to his second thread here, which is a more recent one, saying, in today's Vacnic Soup, I'll introduce how the Elon Musk's election interference machine, EIM, works. Since Musk and his oligarch allies won the presidency for Trump, they've now harnessed the machine to interfere in European elections, including the ones in Germany and Romania. At this point, it's clear why Elon bought Twitter. His grand plan was to promote, quote, free speech absolutism, which, of course, doesn't even exist on the platform, and tweak the algorithms so they allow him to promote political parties that align with his worldview. First, let's talk about freedom of speech that the Trump administration, especially Musk and VP Vance, constantly rant about. Incidentally, they only blame the EU for limiting free speech, and there's no good reason for this. They are driving for political... There is a good reason for this. They're driving for political change. In other words, Vance and Musk et al. Do not criticize China, India, Turkey for attacks on free speech, but only the EU. Have you noticed how when Vance and Musk talk about freedom of speech, they only refer to social media? It's because when you look at other media, they're actually much worse than the EU Press Freedom Index. Musk and Trump have sued people and companies for tens of millions of dollars just because they criticize either Trump or Elon and or his companies. Elon's Doge has also fired anyone who criticizes their activities or publicly decries the organization's legality. The reason why they attack traditional media is simple. They know they can't control it. Experienced investigative journalists and editors-in-chief can't usually be bought, which is why Trump has attacked left-leaning media since 2015. The goal is to remove its legitimacy, but also decrease its influence. See the attacks on CNN, MSNBC, anyone that criticizes, even PBS, NBR, CBS. Trump is out for them, not really for Fox or Newsmax or OAN or Breitbart or the Daily Caller or etc. etc. He is going after those media sites that are critical of him, of course. The Trump team understands the power of social media, and this was easy to realize when you looked at the people at the first row at Trump's inauguration. Zuckerberg, Elon, Bezos, Amazon owns Twitch. This is also why Trump is looking at a potential US buyer for TikTok. And today, Elon has turned X and Twitter into the EIM. Let me tell you how it works. By far the biggest account on X belongs to its owner, Elon Musk. With almost 220 million followers, he can make or break any account on the platform, and he's already helped several pro-Trump X accounts, Inevitable West, Still Grey, Kenakoa the Great, just to mention a few. By the way, Inevitable West was recently outed as a crypto scammer, Indian crypto scammer living, I can't remember where he's living, UAE or somewhere. He's helped them grow into massive pro-Trump influence operations, but that's not everything he can do. He can also drive massive amounts of ad share revenue to these people by retweeting them and commenting on their posts. This massive increase of income has also been evident with Elon Musk's love interests, who have reported monthly payments of up to $20,000 US. In other words, EIM, so his election interference machine, can provide its targets both visibility and money. And again, you can see all the evidence for this in the supporting images. EIM also aims to make X extremely biased and focus on promoting and growing those accounts that support the Trump administration and Elon's Doge. The freedom of speech absolutist Musk isn't afraid to silence and censor accounts that speak against his actions. Musk is ready and willing to use censorship when the requests come from countries like Turkey and India. He removed a BBC documentary about India's Modi and banned accounts of critical journalists in India. Elon has also enabled censorship before the elections in Turkey. By growing and promoting pro-Trump accounts, EIM collects large social media superspreader accounts that fully support Trump's and Musk's policies. Because these accounts quickly garner a large following, they're also promoted to any new user joining the platform. This way, Elon has created a very effective echo chamber where dissenting voices are present but rarely heard. By removing academics' access to analytics tools and hiding likes, any kind of manipulation and inorganic activity is extremely difficult to detect. And now the Trump administration seems to have allied with Russia. The two can cooperate and perform massive scale influence operations that use both automated systems and large social media accounts to promote pro-US and pro-Russia messages. In Germany, both Vance and Musk have now shown their support for the pro-Kremlin party AfD. The party's leader, Alice Weidel, recently called for lifting of sanctions against Russia, and one of their employees even helped the FSB to stop or slow military aid to Ukraine. It's now safe to say that Trump administration's goals align with the AfD's. Otherwise, both Musk and Vance wouldn't be pushing for their victory so aggressively. Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, and so it would be beneficial to have them along in this unholy alliance. So far, Elon has been campaigning massively for AfD, even organising Twitter Spaces and Alice Weidel and speaking remotely at their campaign event. Today, AfD still polls firmly at 20%, and other parties are very hesitant to work with them, so this plan probably fails. In the UK, Elon's been promoting the Reform UK party for a while. He promoted the party leader Nigel Farage and even allegedly planned on donating up to £100 million to get him elected as Prime Minister. Their relationship went sour after Farage failed to root for football hooligan and career criminal Tommy Robinson. Elon, along with the Dubai cronies, quickly turned against Farage, who is now supporting Ukraine's membership in NATO. After this, EIM was turned on to support Rupert Lowe, who is basically one of the main Reform UK MPs. Next step is to try and influence the presidential elections in Romania, where the first round of elections was annulled due to alleged influence campaign from Russia. In 2026, they'll do the same in Hungary, where Orban has been losing steam lately. Meanwhile, the Trump administration ramps up their own censorship efforts, whether it's banning journalists who refuse to use their made-up terminology or outright banning use of specific words in government projects. To conclude, here's a short reminder of how EIM works. 1. Get rid of traditional media with lawsuits and threats. 2. Remove all guardrails and safety measures. 3. Promote and fund Elon's allies. Silence enemies. 4. Play the algorithm. 5. Blame resistance as censorship. And there you go. So you put these two things together. This is why I talk so often about Elon Musk, because he's massively important in driving support for the Russian narrative and driving away support for Ukraine and President Zelensky. We have seen that drop in the US, and that will be partly because of what Musk does on Twitter, but also because of the adjacent people and entities. So you've got Fox News regurgitating Russian talking points, because those people exist in these ecosystems as well. You know, Tucker Carlson, and I know he's no longer at Fox, but, you know, these people, there is just a huge overlap. And the Trump administration itself and the people therein, it's a huge problem, because truth and accuracy are no longer valued. It's all about means to an end. And if we lie to get power and maintain power, then we will lie to get and maintain power. That is what will happen. There is no integrity, I don't think, anymore in these populist movements. The eschewing of institutions, norms, and rules means that there is no trust anymore. There's no trust in those institutions, and really, there's no trust in any politician. And it goes back to that fire hose, that Russian fire hose of, like, if you're flooding the information spaces with just sheer volume of confusion and lies, then it's really difficult to know what's true. And so you start distrusting everyone and everything, most notably established institutions and establishment politicians and judges and lawyers. And then you've pulled apart all the checks and balances for a government. You've pulled apart your trust in anything in society, and it becomes everyone for themselves. And then someone who appeals to you in those intuitive manners, some kind of populist, extremist populist, will fit very well into that kind of mode of thinking, and will promise to burn down all of these institutions that you don't trust and get rid of all of this swamp that you don't trust. And of course, it's really I think maligning those people and institutions largely. It's not to say there aren't political elites that need to be dealt with, or you know, that the country isn't ruined to some degree by lobbyists and by political elites and by some of these nefarious entities that take place. But when you're promising to drain the swamp, and draining the swamp just entails getting rid of all the guardrails, the checks and balances that stop autocracy taking place, then it's not getting rid of those people that really most of us had in mind as being a problem for free and fair democracies. And yeah, these I think populist leaders that promise simple solutions for complex problems, their rhetoric falls on fertile ground when that ground has been tilled by repeated fire hoses of falsehoods, by repeated information farming activities of the Russians. Anyway, interesting threads there by Pekka Kallioniemi. Such a good resource he is. Really appreciate the work that he does. Hopefully this was of interest to you. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.